great things about yoga is that you don't need loads of equipment to be able to practice. If you have a yoga mat, then you should be able to practice some form of yoga. However, there are different props that you can use that help you maybe get into a shape or stay in a shape for longer, giving you a bit of support. So for the next few minutes, I'm going to be talking to you about yoga blocks, how I use them, and how you might want to use them in your practice. I mainly use yoga blocks just to lift the level of the floor up for me. So let me explain what I mean by that. For example, some people find sitting in easy pose quite challenging on the hips. So maybe sitting on a yoga block could be an answer to help make that shape a little bit easier for you. So just lifting the hips up from the floor just allows the hips to open a bit more, creating more space. So popping a yoga block underneath your sit bones as you sit cross-legged or in any seated position actually in yoga could be of help to your body. Another way to use them is to, let me come back to easy pose again. So in easy pose, it might be that your knees don't reach down to the floor and you find that quite straining on the hips. Well, you could always put a couple of blocks under your knees, and the blocks can be used in different at different angles just to give the knees a bit more support, which works for butterfly pose as well if we bring the soles of the feet together. So just lifting the level of the floor up to support the knees in these poses can make the pose a bit more comfortable for you. I often use yoga blocks underneath my hands. So if I come around to an all fours position, and then I'm just going to come here from here into a low lunge position. Well, my hands don't comfortably reach the floor here. I'm on my fingertips. So it's okay for a little bit of time, but if I want to spend any more time here, being on my fingertips is quite uncomfortable. So in a class, I will always trot to the block shelf and grab a yoga block and put the block underneath my hands just to give me a bit of extra support, which I find really useful if I want to lift the back knee up off the floor. I definitely can feel more weight going into my hands to support me there, and that would be really, really difficult if my hands were just on the floor. So a yoga block underneath hands here I find really useful. And if I want to bring the upper body up a bit further, but I still want that extra support of my hands being down, then just turning the blocks the other way allows me to bring the upper body up. I can feel more of a stretch down through my hip flexor on that back leg, but I still got the support of the blocks underneath my hands. So I just feel a bit more stable and a bit more secure in the low lunge. So I definitely use them for a low lunge. Let me just sweep my leg back, because another way that these can be really useful in a practice is to have them on the floor when you're in a standing forward fold. So I'm just going to prop myself up here. So I can reach the floor in a standing forward fold. However, sometimes popping blocks underneath your hands just brings a slightly different shape to the body. So I can reach the floor, but my spine does feel quite hunched maybe and rounded here. So if I want to just bring a length to the spine and just change the position of my upper body, then popping some blocks underneath my hands just feels much more supported and rested in my spine. I just feel much more comfortable. So I definitely could stay here longer with the blocks underneath my hands than I could do with my hands on the floor. So it's just bringing up that level of the floor so that your hands can reach down and you feel a bit more supported. I also use yoga blocks sometimes to close the gap in between different parts of my body. So for example, for me, sitting, kneeling down, I can do it for a few moments, but it really doesn't feel very comfortable on my knees at all. So if I come into a kneeling position, then again, I will usually grab a block and just pop it in between my bottom and my heels, just to give a little bit more, just lift my hips up a little bit more. And that does definitely take some of that strain off of my knees. So just closing the gap there to make this posture a bit more comfortable definitely works for me. Another way that you can use yoga blocks is to bring a bit more strength to the arms in a few different yoga poses. So just bringing your arms out in front and down. And I'm not particularly holding on to the block very tightly, but it does keep my arms in a more fixed position, so they can't splay out here if I'm having to keep in contact with the block. So maybe coming into a mountain pose, standing with your arms above your head, popping a yoga block in between your hands, or maybe like warrior one, you could put a block in between your hands just to bring a bit more of a strength aspect into the shoulders. So I would always recommend that you have a little play with any of these props just to see what works for you and your body. I've made a few suggestions here, but it's definitely worth having an experiment to see what works and what feels comfortable. And it might be that one day, you just can't quite reach the floor and you need your yoga blocks, and on different days you can. And it just changes the body position in some of those poses. So it's a good idea to sometimes use them, even if you don't need them all the time. They are the size of quite a chunky book, so you could use a book to sit on, or just to pop your hands on in those forward folds and those standing postures. So I love a yoga block. I hope this has been helpful and has encouraged you to have a think and maybe a little experiment to see how they could work for you in your practice.